2003. It actually started as a prank by a couple guys in a Harvard dorm. They created this website where they were ranking women in college and asking the question, hot or not? This became known as Face Mash by a guy named Mark Zuckerberg. Well, 2 days into it, it got shut down. And then he would go on to start something called the Facebook. Emphasis on the, because he would eventually trademark it and it would become what we know as Facebook. Well, what became interesting about Facebook is started in 2004 and 2005, they got a little more innovative. They started allowing you to tag people in a photo, right? So now you weren't just looking at people's photos, you were being able to be tagged in one. Well, then something revolutionary happened a few years later in 2009, which many believe, psychologists and sociologists believe that this was one of the most formative things that has happened in our society today. 2009, any guesses? The like button started. The like button. Why? It's because now life began to have this performative element to it, where you were no longer posting things just because you enjoyed them, but now you started posting these things because you wanted to see how many likes you would get. So now filters began to become a thing, and now people are constantly trying to figure out what filter do I use, and you're sitting there for like half of your day wondering, can I actually write the right caption so that people would like it? Or like me. You get those things mixed up often. And so many of us, if we were honest, maybe if you don't post on social media or you haven't engaged in those things, but there's this posting, there's this sharing, that if we are not careful, we do those things in order to get some sort of validation. In order to get some sort of like, hey, look at me, look what I'm going through. And so oftentimes you see people Facebooking their problems and not actually facing them. You see people more often talking to a screen more than they actually talk to other people. I think screens are one of the major reasons why we have fallen into this performative trap. And one of the dangers of this performative, competitive element that the world has really impressioned upon us, I think it's even more dangerous when you see it in the church. Right. When you see it with religious people who are putting on this facade, hoping to get validation from other people instead of knowing that they are validated by God. Right. That's Jesus' critique here on the religious people. Is he's saying there's a danger to this performative lifestyle that you are living. This type of living where you do everything for show. You do everything to be seen by others is one of the main areas that Jesus critiques these religious people. And so this series that we are in, if you are new to it, The Facade, is we are exploring Jesus' critique against the religious leaders of his day. And he's going to step onto the scene, and he is going to declare to them that the type of way you are living is dead. That this facade that you are putting up is actually not my ways. It's not the ways I've called my people to live in the kingdom. And he goes on to say, as he's talking to his disciples in the crowd in verse 5, he says, everything they do, speaking of the religious people, the leaders, the Pharisees, they do for people to see. They make their phylacteries long and their tassels on their garments, or make them wide and the tassels on their garments long. And this idea of a phylactery, like it comes from Deuteronomy 6. And in Deuteronomy 6, it says, you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to the commands that I give you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you're on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. What Jesus was telling his people back then is that there would be photos. You can look this up and Google it online. They would tie these like leather, like strings and bands on their arms, and there would be like these little boxes, and it would be like these reminders of the law. And then they would tie them around their head, and then there would be this box that comes out from their forehead, and these were supposed to serve as reminders of the law that God had given his people. So what he's saying is, it's like, oh, y'all don't want like the normal size boxes that everybody has. Y'all go ahead and you get the Costco size box. Like, you make yours extra wide so that people can see how wide yours are. And then he goes on to talk about these tassels. And listen to what the Lord said to Moses about these tassels in Numbers 15. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the corners of your garments with a blue cord on each tassel. You will have these tassels to look at, and so you will remember all the commands of the Lord, that you may obey them and not prostitute yourselves, that's a whole word, by chasing after the lusts of your own heart and eyes. So not only did they make the boxes extra wide, but they made the tassels extra long. Like, they wanted to walk around being like, yo, I'm a summa cum laude Christian. Y'all ever go to a graduation and you see people with all the extra tassels? I'm like, what's that one for? Did you get perfect attendance and perfect record? What is that? It's like I'm a summa cum laude, magna cum, I don't know which one. You can clearly tell I wasn't rocking. Look at those tassels. I got the tassel for like serving somewhere, and it did not look that cool. It wasn't even a tassel, I'm not even gonna lie. But they made their tassels extra long. So when they walk around, people can be like, oh wow, look at how spiritual they must be. They did it to be seen, to show off, to allow people to look at them externally and say, wow, look at these religious people. They did all of this to be seen. They needed to share these moments of how much they knew or how much they were trying to keep to the law, and they would do things like announcing when they would give to the needy. They would pray out loud just to be heard. They would show their faces when they fast. Look in Matthew 6, there's going to be a couple verses here. In Matthew 6:1, Jesus said, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. Because if you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Verse 2, so when you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets, as do the hypocrites in the synagogues on the streets, to be honored by others. Don't go posting, letting everybody know how much you are giving to other people, letting everybody know what you are doing. Then he goes on to say, and when you pray, in verse 5, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners, just to be seen by others. And then it goes on in verse 16 that says, but when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show that they are fasting. You see how much Jesus is getting at their external features about how they are seen by other people, how they are externally experienced by other people. And he said, there's no reward there. There's no reward there. And these can be subtle. We can often think like, well, we don't put big boxes or anything like that. But if we were taking an honest look at ourselves, we do this in subtle ways. Letting people know in subtle ways all the good things that we're doing. And is living righteously bad? No. Is giving to the needy bad? No. Is fasting bad? No. Is praying bad? No. Jesus, didn't you say that we need to shine our light before the world so that they may see you? Yes, he did. So what are you getting at here? He's getting at, what is your motive? What is your motive for doing these things? What is your motives for telling them that? For posting that thing? What are your motives? Because the question that we need to ask is, are we motivated by God getting glory or you getting validated? Yeah. motivation? Is our motivation at work that God would get more glory? Or we would just look better? Is our motivation to your spouse that God would get more glory? Or you would just look better? What about to your friends? To that extended family that you're just trying so hard to oppress? Is your motivation truly that God gets glory or that you are validated? Because everything can be done for show until you suffer.
Right.
Everything looks good for show until you suffer. See, the problem with the religious people, they didn't. Where do we read at all in Scripture that they showed to people how they suffered? No, you don't see that. You see them showing off. You see them wanting to be seen by other people, doing all these things. These things show up in our world today. A.W. Tozer puts it in The Pursuit of God, that religion has accepted the monstrous heresy that noise, size, activity, and bluster make a man dear to God. This idea of doing everything for show has crept into what I would argue the Western church. Is that we believe that bigger and faster and more programs and bigger lights and all these things are actually better. God's presence is actually more there than in a small little church plant who doesn't have as many people gathering, and it's like black church in here and it's still kind of hot. Only the black people laugh, because y'all know. I think the American church has bought into a lie that the entertainment value of church is where success is at. Can I be honest with you? Not everything that is big is of God. Not everything that is fast and growing is of God. Creative men can manufacture moments. One of the greatest travesties, and I think traps that is entangling the church today, is not sin and Satan, it's man-powered ministry. People that think they can do things in the church without the help and work of the Holy Spirit. You see, but we get so caught up in how many followers that church has or that YouTube channel has of that one pastor, and then all of a sudden we're surprised when that pastor falls because the platform was so big. We spotlighted them. We love to spotlight people. You see, the problem with the spotlight, I remember the first time I went to speak on a stage at a church, and when the spotlight hits, it is so bright on you that you can't see people. Like, it is hard to make out who's in the crowd or who's in front of you because the light is just on you. But we love to spotlight pastors. We love to say things like, well, I go to so-and-so's church. My prayer is, that's why I didn't even introduce myself. I don't want you to know my name. I'm just kidding. My name is Craig. If I haven't met you, it's nice to meet you. But when people think about this church, you know what I want them to say? Man, that community has impacted me. Yeah. That community has helped me see Jesus, be with Jesus, become like him, and do what he's done. That community has helped me. Yeah. But we have this obsession with celebrity and this obsession with more and bigger and faster, and Jesus is like, look, y'all can have songs, you can have sermons, you can have small groups, you can have events, and it can all be lifeless. It can all be lifeless. Just because something is big, just because we go to 2 services, it don't mean the Spirit of God is there. You can be big and you can have a ton of stuff and you can still be dead. That's what Jesus is saying. You can still be spiritually dead because you built all these things on your own abilities just so that you can be seen and not me. He goes on to say, oh, they love the place of honor at banquets. They love the most important seats in the synagogue. Yo, listen, Jesus was a G, okay? G means that he was a metaphorical spiritual gangster, okay? Jesus was in the house. Check this out. Yo, check this out. He was in the house of a prominent Pharisee and religious leader in Luke 14. Listen to what he says. He's looking around. He's noticing where people are sitting. And he says, when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this story. Can you imagine? Can you imagine Jesus, prominent Pharisee leader's house, sitting there, he's looking around, he's like, hey, bring it in. I got a story to tell you. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come to say to you, hey, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place, but when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. You see, there are these U-shaped like tables, and the closer that you were to sitting at the table during that day was like a sign of like your social status as being like a high religious person. So the closer that you sat to the middle, it was like, the better status you got. But as soon as you start going more to the outside, it's like, who's that person? How'd they get invited here, right? It's like your status becomes lower. I remember when I used to do events at a college that I used to work at. And part of doing these orientation events is we would get artists who would come, like big name artists, like guys like Lecrae, the Andy Minios, the Crowders, probably some other people I don't even know myself, but we used to have these artists, and they'd have this thing called a writer. And a writer was essentially what the artist wanted you to create and have in their green room, okay? So your job was to make sure that they had everything that was on the writer, and some of this stuff was crazy, y'all. I'm talking, one person changed I'm not going to name drop anybody because some of y'all may like these people. Lecrae was great. Some of these other people. But we get this writer, and this artist is like, I need a shot of wheatgrass. Excuse me? We could DoorDash you to juice it up. I don't know, but we need wheatgrass and we need all these other things. So we had to go out and buy a juicer. We had to go out and cut some grass from back there because I didn't want him to know where we got it from. Like, you gonna eat this grass off the front lawn. Wheatgrass. But you know what happens in the green room is the green room is often where I see entitlement show up. The green room is often where performers are taking a rest. And here's the thing, the church has often fell in love with the green room and not the throne room. We have fallen in love with serve me, do this for me, can you get this for me, can you give me that program, can you do this thing for me, instead of going into the throne room and saying, God, what do you want? What is it that you want, Father? You see, when we get so caught up in the green room is all about getting your way. The throne room, the place where we meet with the Lord is all about him getting his way. So my question for you this morning is where do you sit? Where do you sit? Yes, this is maybe has a metaphorical sense to it, but like when you show up to sit, where do you sit mentally? Do you sit and say, man, the worship better be on point, Jay better bring a good word? Do you sit just to receive because of your entitlement? Or metaphorically, do you sit in the back and you sit here and you say, man, I cannot wait to get a word from the Lord. God, I am so honored just to be in your presence. When you show up at work, where do you sit metaphorically? Do you sit in the prestigious seats because you want people to know how competent you are? You want them to know how much you know? You want them to know what you did? You want them to know all your achievements? Where do you sit? When you show up to work, what about sitting metaphorically in the back? To show up to say, how can I serve the people around me? In your marriage, where do you sit? Is your spouse just someone that You feel entitled that they need to meet and satisfy all of your needs? Or do you say, hold on, Jesus, I'm going to sit in the back here and see what my spouse needs, how I can serve her, him? Metaphorically, in your friendships, where do you sit? Are you just complaining because none of your friends make the move to hang out with you while you sit there and don't make the move to spend time with them, to be intentional with them? I think we have to ask ourselves, where do we sit mentally in all of these spaces? Where do you sit in community? Do you have eyes to see others? Because when you sit in the front, when you sit in the green room, what you are saying is, I want you to see me. Hey, see me. See me. But when you spend time in the throne room and you sit in the back, it changes and you say, I see you. I see you. And I see you. There's a difference. One will take you more inward, while the other will push you outward. But push you outward in a healthy place because you've been in the throne room. Jesus says all these religious people, they love to be respected. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbis by others. Oh, they love it. They love just walking through with their big old boxes on their forehead and long tassels, and they just love it. Oh, hey, Rabbi. Oh, yeah, that's right. Hey, Rabbi, your tassels are hanging a little bit. Oh, I didn't see it that long. You know what I mean? Like, they love it. They love it. They love it. And one of the dangers is we too often love it in the church today too. Chuck DeGroat, in his book, When Narcissism Comes to Church, that's a whole line. Those who are diagnosably narcissistic may be talented, charming, even inspiring, but they lack the capacity for self-awareness and self-evaluation, shunning humility for defensive self-protection. Christian psychologist Diane Landberg says of the narcissist, he has many gifts, but the gift of humility is not one of them. But can I tell you, we love to platform people like this, though. We love to platform people. They got a lot of knowledge, they got a lot of charisma, they got a lot of charm. Like, we love. It's one of the dangers. Having a mic can be very intoxicating for some people. Being on stage, attaching yourself to someone who's in a powerful position just to be keeping up with the Joneses. Like, if we are not careful, we will fall in love with people who got a lot of gifts but no humility. And Jesus says, in the beginning of this, he's saying, don't practice the way that these Pharisees and religious leaders preach. Don't practice the way they live out their faith. They just love to be seen. They love to be greeted and respected, and they love the titles. Oh, they love the titles. And when humility ceases to exist, defensiveness, pride, and judgmental natures come to the surface. They come to the surface. These are things, and often byproducts, when we seek from others what only God can give us. And the only things that God can give us is true validation, true affirmation, and true approval. We don't need to get it in other people. You definitely don't need to get it from me. You don't need to get it from a leader here. The only validation and approval that you need to get is from God. And he says, I've already approved of you. When you put your faith in me and you trust in me with your life, approved. You don't have to go seek it in these other religious people and in these other churches and the bigger and better thing to cater to. You don't need to seek it there, because be careful not to seek something that's actually dead. Galatians 1:10 says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. What Jesus is getting at is he's saying, I don't want you to do these things that the religious people are doing, because when you start living this way, you no longer become my servant. You no longer become my servant. When you're trying to win the approval of other people, you're no longer my servant. When you are motivated by getting the approval of those at work, of even your kids and in friendships and in marriage, when you are motivated by getting other people's approval, you nullify yourself of being a servant of God. So in those moments, when your motives are set on, how will they think of me? What will they say? Will that get me there? Will this person like me? When that's your motives, as harsh as it sounds, you are serving the enemy. Because if we aren't serving Christ, we're serving something else. And he says you can't have two masters. In God's kingdom, greatness is defined by servanthood. That's what he says. He says, don't do all these things. They love to be seen. They love to be respected. They like the high places. He says, no. In my kingdom, you want to be exalted? You want to be great? Serve. See people. Don't turn everyone's eyes towards you. Turn your eyes towards seeing them. He says in verse 11, the greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And here's the antidote. Here's the antidote. The antidote to the poison of doing everything for show and everything to be seen by people is to run to the secret place. Is to run to the secret place. In Matthew 6, the same verses that I shared earlier, where Jesus was critiquing the religious people of all the things they were doing to be seen by people, he has this other line to it. And this is what he says. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. In verse 6, but when you pray, again, he critiqued them. Don't go on the sides of the streets to be seen and heard by people. But he says, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Oh, it gets better. In verse 17, remember he said, oh, they fast and then they manipulate their face and they walk around like, oh, I've been fasting. It's so hard. He says, but when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father, who is unseen, and your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Y'all, it is the secret place that is the antidote, keeping us from doing things for show, doing things to be seen by others. And it's the secret place where we get to know our Father more, where we get to know our teacher more. Jesus says to the disciples, this isn't the way. In verse 8, he was saying, hey, you have one teacher. Don't desire the titles of rabbi. Don't desire those things. You got one teacher. You got one Father. You got one Messiah. You got one Savior. You got one Christ. You don't need to seek all these other things. You don't need to pursue the titles. You don't need to pursue the places of honor. You don't need to be seen by people, because your Father is with you. And it's in the secret place. It's when you shut the door. It's when you don't have to post and share all your moments. It's in the secret place, which is you and your Father. The door shut, phone off. He says, that's where the reward is. Oh man, that's not going to sell in our day and age. That's not going to sell. Hey, you want to be great? Go shut the door and be by yourself and be with God. That ain't going to sell. That sounds like, what do you mean? It sounds like we're not leveraging our gifts. Sounds like I'm not leveraging my life. The problem is, if you don't get into the secret place, you start leveraging your life for yourself. You start leveraging your life for the enemy. You start leveraging your life for a different kingdom, I'd argue an empire that is not of God's kingdom. It's the secret place that reorients you to the life and way of Jesus. David Benner, in his book, Surrender to Love, he asked this question that I think we all need to consider this morning. That if we were to go into the secret place and be with God, how would you describe the way God feels about you? Right now, if you were to go into the secret place with God, knowing what you've done yesterday and this weekend and how you turned up on the 4th of July, knowing all the things you've done, if you were to go into the secret place with God, how would you describe the way he thinks about you? He says in his book that most people say that he would probably be disappointed. And I'd argue many of you probably feel that way this morning. It's hard for you to even get alone with God because you know that when you get alone, you got to talk to him, and it's like you've been avoiding him. And oftentimes being alone with him, these things come up and bubble up from the surface, from underneath to the surface, and you're faced with the reality of just who you are. But can I tell you, if you have placed your faith in Jesus and what he has done on the cross for you, all he has when he sees you is delight. It's delight. It's not disappointment. And when you know that your Heavenly Father, who's waiting for you to spend time with him in the secret place, delights in you being there, oh man, how much more you would run to that place. You don't run to a place or to a conversation when you know someone's going to be disappointed in you. So how you view God absolutely matters if you will go to the throne room and not the green room. Many of us don't go to the secret place because we're distracted. We're distracted by screens, TVs, cell phone, all these things that are captivating our attention. I don't have to explain. You've all heard the stats. You've all probably seen all the things. All these guys who made the social medias and made these things, they don't even let their own kids use it because they know how disorienting it is to their attention and how it's forming them. I'm sure we've heard these things. I think part of the reason why that many of us don't go to the secret place, yes, it's distractions, but I think that's one of the enemy's greatest tactics. It's just to inch you out of going to the secret place so that you can go perform for other people. You can go get validation from others. And people will affirm you. A lot of you are gifted. A lot of you are great. But that affirmation isn't going to do much for your soul. Because you're still going to lay your head down. And you're still going to have to wake up and perform all over again. But what if you woke up and knew, no matter what you did, all the disappointments, there was still a God who just delights in you. Who's not shaming you back into his presence. The secret place brings a level of security that I think we are all hoping to find in other people. I remember when I did counseling, it was the first time I ever went to counseling, and it was probably it was my 3rd month in, and I'm sitting there with my counselor, and one of the things that I struggle with the majority of my life, being a minority in a majority culture, especially church culture, and just kind of navigating who am I, what has God created me to be, all these things, is I fell into the trap of people pleasing, trying to fit in, trying to wonder where my place was. And I remember that my counselor told me at the time, he's like, see, the dangers of people pleasing, Jay, is that you're not secure right now. And security can only be found with your Heavenly Father. And he said, you know what, Jay, I think you need to know that God is actually proud of you. And I'm sitting in this car, I'm like weeping. I'm like, God's proud of me? Like, what do you mean? Do you know how messed up I am? Like, he's proud of you because you care about getting into his presence and living his way. But you think you got to do it perfectly. So actually, your struggle with people-pleasing people is actually showing when you're trying to people-please God. And so, Jay, just get to the secret place. And it has been the secret place. It has been in prayer and time with God where my life becomes reoriented around who he says that I am. Making his voice the loudest voice in my life. Because I would argue that the primary task of a follower of Jesus is not doing all these things for God, but abiding with God. And this whole word, this word abiding means to remain with him. When everything else wants to pull you away and tell you to perform here or tell you to get the edge there, but would you remain with him? Abide in his love. Pete Scazzaro has this line where he says, the world's discipleship, the way the world forms you, is the world wants you to be popular. Make a name for yourself. But Jesus' discipleship and the way he forms us is to say, hey, be popular with me, just you and me. Just be popular with me. Spend time with me. You don't need to perform for nobody else. You don't need to be popular. I already delight in you. It's the secret place where our willpower is reoriented to do the will of our Father. You see this in Jesus' life. Jesus would perform miracle after miracle, and then it would say Jesus would go up to a quiet place, or he'd go up to a mountainside because he wanted to spend time with the Father. Jesus said in John 6, verse 38, for I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of the one who sent me. Jesus was so secure in what the Father thought that he would find himself washing his disciples' feet. He would find himself seeing the outcast in society. And ultimately, when he would perform all these miracles, you'd see these lines at the end where it says, and Jesus would just like take off and he would leave and he'd be like, hey, don't tell anyone. Jesus, you did the miraculous. You should be trending on TikTok right now. What do you mean don't tell anyone? He's like, don't post it. It's not my time. Jesus was actually trying not to be seen by people. Why? It's because he knew that the time that he wanted to be seen by everyone would be his triumphal entry. Well, he would ride on a donkey. Like, can you imagine? Jesus is, he is escaping from all the celebrity stuff. And on one of the greatest events, where Passover is being celebrated, it's like the Super Bowl for these people. That's when Jesus comes in. And he doesn't come in to be seen and to take over the empire. He shows up at the greatest scene and moment to suffer. The way he is seen is he suffers and goes up on a cross. That's the crowd that he drew. He didn't draw in the crowd so that they would be amazed. He drew in the crowd so they would see him crucified. And then 3 days later, in this secret place, by him, he would raise. And he'd reveal himself to just a few people. Not some big spectacle. And those people would take the good news of the gospel, of a resurrected king who has come to transform your life and my life. Bob Sword says in The Secrets of the Secret Place that I never consider time invested in the secret place to be wasteful, and even if it is, I gladly waste it upon my Lord. And he goes on to say that when you neglect the secret place, he's not disappointed in you, he's disappointed for you. He's disappointed for you. Why? Because he knows it's in the secret place that has everything that you need. And so for some of you this morning, God's calling you not to do things to be seen by people, to do things for show, but to create a secret place. And I don't know what that is for you, but I pray that he would reveal that to you. And for some of you, I think God's calling you to serve. Maybe it's this church. This isn't some sort of manipulative ploy to get you to sign up to serve. Maybe he's called you to actually know that being the greatest in his kingdom is having the posture of a servant. Not just consume everywhere you go and tell people to look at you, but to show up in spaces and to say, I see you, and I see you. And I think for some of you in this room, I think it's to put your faith in him. It's to trust him. You've been performing your whole life, and there's a God who says, hey, you don't need to perform with me. I've already done it.